That campaigning has delivered some results. Some countries have signed and ratified the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, even though they have not implemented it. You can keep pushing for that. What I saw, and this is the product of Infidel and Nomad, is even in the United States, in the United Kingdom, in Holland, in France, places where the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, as far as it regards women, has been adopted and implemented, that Muslim women are excluded from that, excluded from the protection of the law. There are Muslim lobby organizations in Canada, in the US, in the UK, lobbying for parts of Sharia to be accepted.
Describe what Sharia law is. I know here in the United States much has been written about it, but I'm sure our audience would be interested in hearing your definition of Sharia law.
Sharia law is Islamic law, or law derived from Islam. Islam means submission to the will of Allah, was founded by Muhammad bin Abdullah. He considers himself a prophet and is regarded by his followers as a prophet. Initially in Mecca, he had only preached an attitude toward humanity and toward one another of hospitality and charity, etc. Once in Medina, when he fled from Mecca, he went to Ethiopia, then called Abyssinia, landed in Medina, and once in Medina, his following became strong enough to form a militia or militias, and from being a peace-loving, peace-preaching prophet, he turned into a warrior, a conqueror. And at that time, when his following became so large, almost as large as a society at that time, he said that he had laws revealed to them that must govern that society. And that set of laws that were revealed to him and their further evolution is termed Sharia, or Islamic law. Now, you have to imagine those laws in the context of the 7th century, and as they evolved the 8th, 9th, 10th centuries. The laws governing women and men at that time were considered to be incredibly progressive. For instance, in the context of that Arab desert culture, which was very patriarchal, men were allowed to have an unlimited number of concubines. He reduced that to 4. Men could leave women at will. He decided that they should now have a dowry. He introduced the law of banning infanticide. In that context, little children, girls, if they were considered to be too many, were buried alive. He banned that. It was very, very progressive at that time. But if you take Sharia law from that time, 7th century, regarding women, and you apply it now in the 21st century, when countries like the United States are governed by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and women are equal to men, and you disinherit women, they inherit half of what their brother gets. Their testimony is worth half of that of a man. They get a so-called dowry that is determined by a guardian, and that is not really what they want, or at least does not serve their interests. That when raped, they have to produce, they have to testify against the man who raped them, but their testimony is worth only half. All of these things, that they have to have a guardian, all of these things that in the 7th century seemed very progressive, in the 21st century are really very, very reactionary and detrimental to women. And that is my criticism on Sharia. Let's stop doing everything as we used to do and looking to the past and trying to revive the 7th century. Let's look forward, and to Western society, to Americans, let's not exclude women from the general law that applies to all of us only because they were born into Islam, and only because the perpetrators justify their actions in the name of religion or culture.
Now, when your book came out, and just recently, the New York Times, Sunday magazine, had you featured, and there were a series of questions asked in the magazine, and the title of it was Feminist, and it was casting you as a feminist. Do you view yourself as a feminist?
I view myself as a feminist in the classical sense of the word, when feminists fought for the rights of women, but these were rights that were a matter of life and death, and they were a matter of justice. I have encountered feminists who have a different set of priorities. Feminists who feel that we should all organize ourselves in order to move in relationships between men and women, whether they're married or not, for the men to do their fair share of household chores. That's very important, but I'm not going to join such a movement. I think if you're intelligent enough, you will be able to sort that out yourself. Feminists who organize themselves to open the golf, all-male golf tournaments to become female golf, so women can be allowed into it. Very laudable, but I'm not a part of that. I just don't think it's a priority when children, little girls, are denied life, when they're pulled out of school, when they are being killed. There is a movement, or part of the feminist branch, who feel that shattering the glass ceiling is a great priority. It's not my priority. When I read about girls here in the United States who are taken by their father, put in a cab and shot and run over by their fathers, when all of this is going on, and I'm not even talking about China and India and all the terrible things that are done to women and against women, and that happens to Chinese women here and to Indian women here, I think that as feminists we should rearrange our priorities and say, you know, when it comes to violating the most basic rights of women, that getting rid of that and addressing that and fighting that should be our priority, and that the other parts of it, all very important but very luxurious, just go down on the list.
The United Nations had a series of Arab human development reports, and in those reports there were sections in fact devoted to women and areas in which women were denied rights or denied opportunities, especially in terms of voting, in terms of employment. Do you think that those kinds of reports can have some impact? Have you seen some change? Because clearly you're trying to get out certain messages about the kinds of changes and the kinds of opportunities. You have several messages in your book.
Yeah.
But do you think reports like that, where you have a report that is in fact written by Arab scholars, can be helpful to bring about change?
Absolutely. I know those reports, and I think they're extremely important in our time, because they start with acknowledging the fact that women are denied their freedom, that large swaths of Arab Muslim women are denied education, so that now in some countries you even have a 70% illiteracy among women. Mm-hmm. You have maternal mortality, you have child brides, you have forced marriages, you have stonings and killings. These reports were incredibly important because they acknowledge that there is something wrong. What I would like to do with others, I'm not the only one, is to take that discussion to the next level. Not only acknowledge the very despairing and terrible position of Arab Muslim women, but also acknowledge the causes that underlie them. In my case, especially those that have to do with the customs, the habits, the convictions, the religious justifications that are given for these atrocities. So it's not enough for all of us to come out and say, killing women is bad, child brides are bad. But why child brides? What is it that motivates a father to sell his daughter to another man for a little bit of money? To every father who has been questioned, he says, but the Prophet Muhammad did it. He is my moral guide. I am a Muslim. I'm following that guidance. Let us then discuss that guidance and investigate it and teach that man something new other than that guidance. That is the sort of thing, that is the step that we have to move, and that is the step that is taboo, and it's the most difficult step because we're talking about a 1400-year-old religion and tradition, and it's almost set in stone. It's not set in stone, things are moving, but that is the most difficult part of it, and that is really what, you know, where all the work is going to be.
You're an advocate, clearly, of dialogue, and you mentioned at the beginning of our discussion, and it's in your book, about the importance of dialogue. And One of the areas that you have been engaged in and also trying to advance is having Christians and speaking and sitting down with Muslims and having, if you will, almost cross-religious discussions and opportunities to benefit from the experiences. Develop that a bit. Talk about that, about your ideas in that regard that you have identified in the book and that you are actually acting upon.
Well, I feel like in the West, if you assume that Samuel Huntington's thesis of a clash of civilizations is correct, I feel that in the West we have been cornered into an attitude of defense. We are on the defensive continuous. You're always saying, we are not Islamophobes, we are not discriminating, we like you, on the one hand. On the other hand, we are using military means and spying methods to deal with jihad and with the violence against the West, against women, etc. What I would like us to do is to go back to the realm of ideas, assume that Muslim individuals are endowed with reason, that if engaged in dialogue, and I mean in proper dialogue where you don't shy away and move around and beat about the bush in the areas where there is a real conflict of values, but really address them, that there is a possibility of changing people's minds. Just last night I was in Philadelphia and it was on the record. A young Muslim woman stands up with a headscarf and she challenges me. She's from Afghanistan and she challenges me. She says, I'm born in Afghanistan and the men in my family were good to me. They sent me to school. I am now in university in the United States and it's because of the men in my family. Ayaan, I dare you to tell me what is it about the Quran that you didn't like? And I gave it to her. I told her, well, it's chapter 4, verse 34, the verse that says, beat your wife. It is chapter 2, verse 222, that gives men permission to rape their wives in marriage. Women from Afghanistan have protested against this. This was reported, I read it in the New York Times, but this was reported in the West. This young woman was sitting there, jotting down those verses. She's going to look them up. She's going to link them. I'm not saying that I've changed her mind or that I've made her into something else that she's not, but I was so inspired and encouraged by her curiosity, by wanting to know what it was that I didn't want. And I see most Muslim people, such as that young woman, wanting to know. There are a group of them, very elite, very privileged, living in the United States. I encounter them in campuses that have these post-scripted narratives that they come with, who are not ready to listen, but are just there to grab the mic and do their thing, which is to defend the image of Islam, but they're not speaking for Islam. They're not speaking for Muslims. They're not speaking for this young woman who wants to know, who wants to learn, for whom learning is a great deal. And I am sure that if Christians were to do the same, if feminists were to do the same, if Enlightenment thinkers were to do the same, that many, many Muslim minds that are now trapped in this radical, born-again Islam, this jihadist form of Islam, would change their minds and adopt new ideas, are open to something else other than following the example of Muhammad.
Are you trying to put together formal dialogues and discussions toward that end? You're clearly speaking to different audiences and targeting some here and there, but in a systematic way. Are you thinking about the organization of these kinds of dialogues, maybe with some of the same people, not just once, but several times? Is that something that's on your agenda?
It is on my agenda, but again, I believe in putting as a priority really the most severe forms of human rights violations. I've started the AHA Foundation, which is a short form for Ayaan Hirsi Ali, but also the Enlightenment AHA. And the AHA Foundation, with a number of American women who said, we don't just want to talk, we want to do something. And I pointed out to my experience in the Netherlands and in Europe, where for a long time these practices of female genital mutilation and forced marriages, honor killings, child brides were going on, and society was looking the other way. And I said,